announcements from the temple. Well, it's usually in there, Women's Torah Study, and it says, click here for the text. It's usually like an attachment.
Okay.
You have to just look. It says right here, click. And
My
then
eyes are worse than I thought. Okay.
well, maybe you just didn't know what it meant. Now you can look for it.
I
It
didn't
wasn't there this week. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't see it.
Rabbi, I don't
Yes.
even think there was a notice that I got this week for your Torah study. I actually had to go back to the calendar and click on it to
I
get
thought it
access
was
to
there
the-
yesterday.
No, it was there. It was there on the Monday newsletter.
Yeah,
That's
it was
where I
there
just got-
yesterday.
Okay, all
But
right.
it was deeper because of all the Passover stuff. It was just, you had to scroll farther.
Yeah,
Okay,
it was there.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you, Donna. That's sweet of you. Okay, so let's start with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Amen. So I'm going to start with this, the women who saved Moses. How's that for print? You can't.
Great. Big.
This, I can even see it.
Okay.
It's very big, yeah.
I don't know that I
I
can
got
read
it.
it, but I see it.
I can see it.
Okay, so this is the text. The first two women who saved Moses were midwives. And I didn't do the preamble, but it's when a new Pharaoh came into the land. He didn't remember Joseph or anything he had done. And he saw that the Israelites were getting too strong, and he made them slaves. And he really oppressed them because he was worried that they would, I don't know, form a fifth column and rise up against him or the Egyptians. And they still continue to have children and, sort of increase and be okay. So then the Pharaoh or the king of Egypt came up with this idea. And I'm just going to read the first sentence and then we'll go. Oh, well, let's have somebody else. Cindy, why don't you read?
Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah.
Okay, I want to stop. So it says in this translation, Hebrew midwives, but in the actual Hebrew, it says it could be Hebrew midwives or midwives to the Hebrews. So the question is, were they Egyptian or were they Hebrew? And in the actual text, you cannot tell who they were. The rabbis and the Midrash talk about it. We're going to take a look, but it's the midwife okay, keep going. Okay, Cindy, keep going.
When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live.
Okay, so I want to stop again because the word in Hebrew is not birth stool. And as I've said this before, translation is commentary. They really kind of tell you how to think or visualize things. It actually says on the stones. It says when you see them on the stones. And what it was is there would be two stones that a woman would sit on, maybe upright stones, and she would bear down on that, and then the midwife would be underneath and catch the baby. So when they get to the stones, it's when they're about, the baby's coming. So that's what they're saying. And later it became an actual stool. In the ancient world, it was kind of like a bench with a hole, like a toilet, and you would push through and their midwife would be sitting on the ground and would catch the baby. But at this ancient time, they were just sitting on sort of maybe a pile of upright stones, one on, under each thigh or under each buttock, and then she would push down. So it's interesting because the commentaries often play on the word. Okay, so continue.
But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them.
Okay, so what do you think that means? I'm going to stop this for a second. What do you think they're saying about these Hebrew women as their reasoning?
I think they lied just to give an excuse that they didn't kill the boys.
Okay, but what was their excuse?
That the labor was so quick, they didn't have time to get there.
Exactly, that's right. And there's another implication that they're like animals. They're like animals, they give birth really fast and we don't get there. And since there's a commentary that it's dehumanizing the Hebrew women, these slaves are not like normal women. They're more like animals, you know what I mean? They just give birth right away. And since, there's the 1 second, Pamela, just there's this sense of, inferiority or distancing or othering your slaves, your servants, whatever. And so he believed it. Oh yeah, they're not like us.
If only that were true, it'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, I see it as being superior, that you can give birth faster.
Well, she was comparing them to animals.
Right.
As an excuse, we know. Yeah. Okay.
We don't even know if that was true that they gave birth faster, but
No, they
she
probably
said that because she wanted to save the boys and she didn't want to obey him. I mean, he
Exactly.
was a nice man, let's face it.
Yes, you're right.
Going to obey God more than man.
Okay, just a second, Pam lost trying to speak. Yeah.
But I think it's also interesting. Yes, the excuse says, oh, they're just animals, so we don't have any control over it. They just do it so fast, whatever. But I think it's interesting that once the child was born, then the implication is you can't kill it once it's already been born. That you would have to, or once the mother already knows it's been born, or something like that, because otherwise, what difference would it have made? Right? Like if the child had already been born before they got there, that means that the child, there was something in the law or in tradition or whatever in the culture that said once they've taken that first breath and the mother knows they've been alive, then you cannot kill that child.
Well, as we
Maybe
know,
that's wrong, but to me that's interesting. Why does it matter when they get there?
exactly. Well, I'll go back to that. But as you remember, when this didn't work, the next step is to say, take them all and throw them in the Nile. But he was saying, as you're giving birth, as you're delivering the baby, smother it or strangle it or do something and just say, oh, the baby didn't live. You know what I mean? He was asking them to commit murder, but in a stealthy way. If you come and the baby is swaddled and already nursing at the mother's breast, it's a little hard to rip it away or whatever, the family's around. But if he was trying to do it in a very subversive way, because otherwise, why tell the midwives to do it? You know what I mean? So it's like when you're giving birth, kill them,
Would they be telling the mothers the baby was stillborn?
Yeah, that's the implication. Oh, it died. Something went wrong. There was this, whatever. I don't even think that Pharaoh, as a man, and we know that until 50 years ago, men didn't even go in the delivery room. They didn't know what happened. Most men, I mean, some, but they had no idea. They were downstairs pacing and hearing the screams and waiting. So I doubt Pharaoh even understood the process, but he thought, well, when whatever you're doing, kill them while they're being born. I don't know if he knew how, but they wouldn't. They didn't. And then they said, well, by the time we get there, they're already born, so there's no opportunity. Obeying Adonai instead of Pharaoh. Exactly, because it says the women feared God. They knew it was wrong. Okay. Oh, wait, sorry. That's not what I have to do. I'm going to go back to you. I have to say share. Also, this is the first on record in ancient sort of record of civil disobedience. To disobey the Pharaoh was not an easy thing to do. The Pharaoh was considered a god.
Yeah.
So to disobey the God of Egypt, we could say, okay, they were Hebrews, so Hebrew women, so of course they didn't see him as God. Or were they righteous Egyptian women who understood that there was a higher morality or God than the Pharaoh? So it's not clear, and there are different points of view about it. So let's keep going. Okay. So Stacy, do you want to read? Hold on, let me just move it down. Hold on. Okay.
Okay, so God dwelt with, is that where we're, oh,
Oh, wait, hold, yeah. Wait a minute, isn't there more? Yes.
but the midwives.
Yes. So God dwelt with the midwives.
So God dwelt well,
Oh.
so God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live.
Okay, so what's interesting is in Hebrew, again, it doesn't say families, it says batim, which means houses, like households or houses, not literally dwellings, but households. And we'll see some commentaries think it meant they gave them nobility and royalty and high level households because of this. So this is just all that's in the text about this midwife incident, just this little section in Exodus 1. But the rabbis and all the commentators have a lot to say about it. So now we're going to look at that. Okay, so Stacy, read a little more.
Okay. Pua and Shiphrah were the midwives who defied Pharaoh's orders that all male Hebrews be killed at birth. Pharaoh does not punish the women for their defiance, and in fact, they seem to be rewarded by God for their actions. It is not clear whether the midwives were Egyptian or Israelite. It may be that they were overseers for Pharaoh's harem and held positions of honor.
Okay, so how did he know them? They were known. And there's also this question of how could two women be the midwives for all the Hebrews? Is there a sound problem? Do you hear it? Or is it just me? I don't know. Okay. How did two midwives deliver all the babies of the Hebrews, whether they were Jewish, or Hebrew or Egyptian, when they're, according to the, there were 600,000 people or 600,000 men alone. So there were hundreds of thousands of women. So there is any ideas of why these two women may have been called? Well, one says that they could have been in his harem, but any other ideas of why these two women were singled out and considered the primary midwives?
I have a thought about fearing God, and that perhaps if they were Egyptian, they feared the Egyptian gods. The Egyptian gods, there was a lot of Egyptian gods. Right?
Yes, but my question is,
Yeah, I understand.
how could just two women be the only midwives for hundreds or thousands of women, other women? I mean, they would be delivering day and night, everywhere. Penina.
Is it possible?
1 second. Penina, you're muted.
Okay, I don't think there was that many. They were counted the 600 when they left, but when they left, there were a lot of non-Hebrews that followed with them. I don't think the community was that large. So
there were 12 tribes, though.
I really don't know how to explain it. I just think that the number was not as big. So that's all. So I really don't, for me, it's also, but I don't think there were 600. 600,000 were counted when they left, but they had a lot of non-Hebrews that came with them. The people that came down originally were only 70. That's it.
Right,
so,
but 400
so you can
years.
multiply, okay, by the number of years, but I don't have any answer, but there definitely wasn't 600,000.
Okay.
Lot less.
Diane, did you want to say something? No. Oh, Susan, and then Pam.
And they weren't midwives to everybody. They were only to Jewish women, and not all of them are going to give birth at the same time also. So I don't think, I agree with Penina. That's what I was going to say. There are not that many there, and they're not
only that.
Wait, Susan finish. So Susan, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
at the same time, and they said these are the midwives to the Hebrews, so they're not dealing with the other people.
Okay, Pam.
Well, I have many possible thoughts about it. One is, I would imagine that just like 100 years ago in the United States, not everybody could afford a doctor. So they had a midwife and those who could afford a midwife, right? So I'm wondering if the midwives were only for the more senior upper echelon. Even if you're slaves, there were hierarchies in that world, right?
Yes.
So I'm wondering if that's a possibility. Also, that perhaps they're sort of, people learn how to do these things, right? You train to be a midwife. It's like any other trade. It's just that it's the woman's world, so they didn't write anything about it in history. So maybe these were like the senior midwives, and so they would spread the word.
That is one of the thinking, that they were the heads of schools midwives. That they were the senior midwives, like, there's the senior nurse in a hospital and she's the director of nurses. So one thought is that they were the two nurse midwife directors and they were supposed to tell everyone else. Okay, just a second. Doris?
Well, I had a thought that excuse me, possibly the others obeyed the Pharaoh and did what he was
There we go.
told them to do. I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying that's a possibility, that they were afraid of him and they just figured, I'm going to do what I was told and save my life, I guess, because
That's very interesting.
Yes, I agree on that one.
Okay, so maybe that some of them did it, but Penina, you're right, maybe Shifra and Puah were the only ones who
They
didn't do it.
are singled out because they're the ones that say that they feared God, the God of the Israelites.
And they didn't do it.
So
Okay,
they're telling you a story that some of the non-Jewish people started to actually believe in that monotheism idea.
Okay, so let's talk about
or
who
the
they
God
were.
of the Hebrews, whatever you want to call it.
Right, so let's see who they were. Okay, so let's continue with the hold on. Let's see, we're going. Okay, so okay, positions of honor. Okay, who would like to read
I would, but where are we?
Okay.
Your position.
the first chapter?
I can
Okay,
read.
all right. The first chapter of Exodus relates that as the Israelites in Egypt began to proliferate following the death of Joseph, bear with me, the Egyptian king seeks to curb the Israelite population lest the numbers threaten the security of Egypt in times of war. And when the enslavement of the Israelites fails to achieve Pharaoh's goal, he commanded the Hebrew midwives, of whom only two, named Shifra and Puah, to kill at birth all the male Hebrews, but to permit the females to live, since, however, the midwives stand in awe of God, they violate the Pharaoh's command and permit the boys to live. Yay, girls, yay.
Okay, I'm just gonna read. This is just, I'm gonna quickly go through this. Call to account for failing to carry out Pharaoh's orders. Shifra and Puah report that the Hebrew women are more vigorous than Egyptian women and tend to deliver their babies before the arrival of the midwife. Convinced by the midwife's explanation, Pharaoh did not punish them. Their explanation is probably accepted because of a universal human tendency to dehumanize victims, especially women, as a prelude to depriving them of basic civil rights, their reproductive freedom, their progeny, and ultimately their very lives. So it's dehumanizing these women. They're not like us. Okay, so let's do this now. Penina, why don't you read?
The identity of the midwives is somewhat ambiguous. The fact that they are given names is extraordinary, especially because other important female characters, Moses' sister and mother, and Pharaoh's daughter, are not named.
Yeah, they're not named in this part of the story. Pharaoh's daughter is never named, but Moses, we learn their names later in other texts. Go ahead.
Right. The Hebrew text of Exodus 1:15 supports either the view that Puah and Shifra were Hebrew midwives or the view that they were midwives to the Hebrews. As Egyptian women, their willingness to defy Pharaoh would be exceptional. It is more likely that they were Hebrews because both names are Semitic, not Egyptian.
Okay,
that's
so they're
interesting.
saying they think they were Jews.
Right.
Okay.
Modern commentators have wondered how two midwives could have served a whole community.
That's what you just
Even
said.
if the figure of 600,000 men is not taken literally, the obvious answer is that the text does not claim that Shifra and Pua were the only midwives to serve the Hebrews, but rather were two among many. Why then were they singled out? The tale implies that they are mentioned because of their virtue in fearing God. That's what I thought. More than they feared Pharaoh. In the Hebrew Bible, the phrase fear God can mean obey God's ethical imperatives. It is noteworthy that Exodus 1:1-2, in its highly Semitic survey of Hebrew history from the descent of Jacob into Egypt until the birth of Moses, mentions by name only the midwives, Shifra and Pua. The crucial role of the midwives in subverting Pharaoh's decree is perhaps reflected in the Talmudic attribution of the redemption from Egypt to the merit of the virtuous women of that generation.
So do we understand? It's very, first of all, mentioning names, especially women's names, is very significant in the Torah. And as Penina has pointed out, when they mention names, it means there's a shift or something momentous is going to happen, which is going to be the birth of Moses, which is facilitated by these women not being willing to kill the Hebrew babies, whether they were Egyptian or Israelite or Hebrew, and that the Talmud even recognized, and that right before this is here are the people who came from Egypt, and they don't mention any other women, anything, just Shifra and Pua. So they're very, very important women. I think we should have something in the Seder for them, something on the Seder plate. Okay, if we were going to put something on the Seder table for Shifra and Pua, what would you suggest? Let's take a moment and have a little fun. What would you suggest?
Maybe the hard-boiled egg is a symbol. It's a starting of life. It might be.
It could
You
be.
read my
That's a
mind.
good-
I agree.
That's a good one. Any other idea? I like that, the hard-boiled egg. I've
Yeah.
always thought the egg was about fertility because,
It's about, exactly.
I mean,
It's about
because-
rebirth of freedom, the rebirth of the nation.
but not just freedom, actual fertility, because Easter, which is right next to Pesach, has an Easter egg. And what does an egg have to do with the resurrection of Jesus? It's really nothing to do with it. It's about spring, rebirth, or fertility. So the egg, any other ideas of something we could put, Pam?
Oh, I wanted to say something about the egg, which I heard this week, which I thought was interesting, which is that before chickens were domesticated, I heard this just this last week, before chickens were domesticated, they only actually gave birth in the spring. So that it was literally a sign of spring and rebirth and renewal when the chickens were actually laying their eggs.
So they didn't lay their eggs the rest of the year, just in the spring.
Just like every other animal that mostly gives birth in the spring and summer, the chickens did the same thing before they were domesticated.
Oh,
Wow, that's
That
interesting.
makes more sense. Wow, that's very interesting.
So I just wanted to, is when I read it or heard it or whatever happened in the last 10 days, I was like, oh, I wonder if we're going to talk about this. I'm going to try and raise it. So perfect opportunity. So
May I just say, Pamela, you're very smart. I like you a lot.
thank you. I don't know about that, but I pay attention a little bit.
So is the egg good enough? Does anybody have, I don't have it. I mean, I haven't thought about it because the question just, if I were going to do anything, I guess you could put two beautiful stones or something. If you wanted to do like the birthstones, and it's called stones. If you took two beautiful colored stones and put them on the table and said, this is for one for Shifra, one for Pua, one for giving birth and saving life or something. But other than that,
cherries were in season. Like, you know how cherries grow in those two things that could sort of be representative of that, but they're not for till the summer.
right.
They're supposed to drink, you're supposed to drink a lot of wine. So here we go, the grapes, maybe.
Grapes,
On
maybe.
the vine, you got like more than one. So
That's
it's
interesting. Yeah.
And like on a wedding band, you have your birthstone and your husband's birthstone and a diamond.
Maybe
Well,
a purple and a green grape, huh?
Could be something like that. Oh, Diane, do you have an idea? Are you raising your hand? You're muted. Diane, you're muted. You're muted. Diane, you are muted. Unmute yourself. She's talking, but I can't hear you.
Mm-mm.
Can you unmute yourself, Diane? Press on the little microphone.
Maybe you can unmute her. Is that possible? You could-
I don't know.
I did it.
Hannah? Oh,
I
okay.
didn't have a question. How did the midwives get their instructions?
How?
Who? What?
It
How did
feels like Pharaoh called them into the palace and told them directly.
Or did they get a message from something else, some God?
You mean not to do
Pretty
it?
sure it was a text.
Whatever
I'm
message
pretty
they
sure it was a
got, I don't think the Pharaoh got hold of all the midwives. There were many besides those two, right? He didn't talk to them, so how did they get their message?
I think then it says in the text, he called them and said, do this. And then he called them back and said, why aren't you doing this? It could have been through a servant. It could have been through something, but I don't think it was anything supernatural. I don't know what you're implying. Or suggesting.
Yes, well, I'm implying that God only spoke to who? Moses? He didn't speak to the midwives.
Well, oh, you mean when they didn't do it? It doesn't say God spoke to them. It just says that they feared God. So they knew of God. They knew what was right and wrong.
Or did the message come from God, not Pharaoh?
The message to kill the babies?
No, to let them live.
Well, that didn't come from Pharaoh. That came from either God. What we
Well,
attribute.
how did they, we understand that they got the message.
No, the
Yeah.
midwives did it on their own, didn't they?
Well, I know it, in one way, yes, but
No, they didn't do it on their own.
there are
Being up here.
people in this world, many religious people who believe that all your impulses are messages from God, all your good impulses, all your ethical impulses are messages from God. So one could interpret it as like, I mean, if they're Hebrew midwives, then they knew their history, they knew about God, and they knew it was wrong to kill, or to murder a child. They feared being punished for that. I mean, I think killing a child is something that the gods or God might punish you for, depending, what your belief system. But their blessing, they're saying God bless them by giving them children, houses, families, whatever. So beyond that, we don't know. We only know what the text says. But let's look at a little more about them. Hold on. Where do I have to say share? Where do I say share? And, how about Pamela? Why don't you read?
You can have a community, a whole nation, and only few people would really believe in one thing, and other people would believe in something else, maybe in the same order, but differently. So
For sure in this time, as we know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think killing a child is evil. It's horrible.
Well, I
It's
think
just-
that's what they thought.
That's what they thought
exactly
too.
what the midwives felt and thought.
Exactly.
Okay, Pam.
Susan, just before Pam.
Oh, sorry, Susan, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
An answer to Diane's question too. At many places in the Bible, they say, when Abraham was traveling with Sarah, he said he was afraid of that place because they don't fear God, and that is a common statement for people who don't have the same ethics or any sense of morality. So, as a common thing, they feared God. They had a sense of morality, of ethics. And in terms of
what did the Philistines did when they first came into the land? They destroyed all the altars and blocked all the wells, so they won't have any water, but they also destroyed all the altars. So we know that we have this thing that the religions are fighting or killing by the name of God or whatever it is that they did.
They're still doing it in some parts of this world. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. Pam.
It is also possible that these two midwives were singled out because they held specific positions of honor. The Egyptian royal harems had women of different backgrounds, and Puah and Shifra were perhaps the head midwives or overseers of the harem. The evidence from ancient Egypt and the ancient Near East suggests that midwives were trained professionals and even religious practitioners working in the liminal space between life and death. This would explain why Pharaoh spoke directly to them and why only midwives were addressed.
Only two midwives.
Oh, sorry, only 2 midwives. Yeah, that's kind of the key part of that sentence.
Okay, keep going.
Okay. Because of their heroic acts, Shifra and Pua are regarded by God with batim, houses. The meaning of houses here is unclear. The most common interpretation is that the midwives are promised progeny. It is also possible that the women are promised freedom from the house or royal harem of the pharaoh. In this case, then God's reward would be more about freedom than fertility.
Okay, so that's really interesting because it says God rewarded them with houses, and this idea, if they were, first of all, if they were Hebrew midwives and they worked in the harem, they were the house slaves, as we would say, like, as we said, there's a hierarchy. So they were delivering the Egyptians' wives' babies, the royalty. And so that's how he, called them in, because they already lived in the palace. And the idea is that they were rewarded with houses. Perhaps they were rewarded with freedom to leave the palace and go home and be with their families, or some kind of freedom. So there's like a theme of freedom possibly even in this reward. And the reward is beyond a child, or even, famous children, but their own personal freedom, getting a little bit of freedom. Any questions or comments about this? Yes, Kim.
I'm still a little lost on why they're killing the boys and not boys and girls. Is it to keep the women as breeders for the Egyptian women that can't have children in the future? Or?
I
They
think it
wanted
was
to
more
avoid them. They didn't want them to grow up and become an army. So the
yeah, they
boys
were
got to
worried
be
about
killed.
them. Though I did read, there's so many commentaries on this, I didn't even include them all, but one of them says, one rabbi says, they should have been killing the women. He made a mistake because then they wouldn't be able to give birth to any more children. So, but he didn't think that, he thought of like them growing up to be an army, male warriors or whatever. So that's the thinking. But you're right. If you want to not have more Hebrew baby. In fact, there's a midrash about Miriam that we might read later. I just don't know how because it's such a good discussion, where there's a midrash that says that when Pharaoh made this decree, Miriam's father Amram, who was one of the leaders in the Levite tribe, said, okay, we shouldn't have any more children because they're all going to be killed. So this is in the story, that he divorced his wife, and all the Israelites divorced their wives so that they wouldn't have sex with them and they wouldn't have children. And then Miriam went to her father and said, you are wiping out the Jewish people, the Hebrew people. The sons may die, but if there aren't even any women, we'll just disappear. And you are actually doing a worse thing than Pharaoh, because there will be none of us in that respect. And so then he remarries his wife, and the other men remarry their wife, and then they have the baby Moses. Because the question is, how come they say there was a man who married his wife and he had a baby named Moses? And when we know he had 2 other children already, Miriam and Aaron, who were older siblings. So the rabbis came up with this lovely explanation that they were divorced. And then they got remarried, and this was their first child of their remarriage.
Oh, wow.
So, but I love the rabbis.
Marry in that context just means like have sex with them.
I'm sorry, what?
Is Mary in that context then, oh, the man actually had sex with his wife as opposed to the handmaidens or maidservants or whatever?
I think, there was a more marriage ceremony, there was a marriage contract, or there was a blessing or something, a exchanging of rings or something. I mean, there was some marriage thing. You didn't just, to have a wife, there had to be some kind of marriage ceremony and status. And then we know in Judaism, you can give back the contract and then you're divorced. So they had to remarry in some way. It wasn't just, oh, I sleep with you, now we're married. Though actually that is one of the symbols of marriage, but when you're not married, that's adultery, so you can't do that. Yes, Rebecca.
Is there thought that Shifra and Pua were actually mother and sister to Moses?
Mother, yes, there is, and we're about to read that they were actually Miriam and Yocheved. That's another interpretation. And thank you and you can read, because I'm going to go there right now. Hold on. Okay, so,
Because of their heroic act,
oh, wait, wait a minute. I just want to see if it comes. Yeah, okay. Let's just read this part first, and then we'll go to the thing you said. But hold on, because that's next. But first, I wanted to do this thing about stones, because I thought it was interesting anthropologically. Go ahead. The Hebrew
the
term,
Hebrew term for a birth stool, abnaim,
yes.
means literally two stones. It may refer to the primitive form of the birth stool, which simply two bricks or stones placed under each of the buttocks of the woman in labor. Such birth stools are depicted in the later forms of the hieroglyphic symbols for birth and are referred to in ancient Egypt folk sayings such as, "He left me like a woman on the bricks."
Oh my God, I love that. He left me like a woman on the bricks, like while I was giving birth, he left me. In my
Vulnerable.
most vulnerable moment, he left me like a woman on the bricks. I love that. I would like to use that. And then people will wonder what I'm saying.
I
Go
don't want a guy like that.
Okay, keep going, Rebecca.
Ancient Egyptian pictorial art shows that the two bricks were replaced by a chair with an opening in the middle like a toilet seat, through which, with the help of gravity, the mother could push out the baby into the deft hands of the midwives.
Okay, here you go.
According to one rabbinic position, Shifra and Puah were mother and daughter, Yochebed and Miriam, and
Right.
according to
Wait, because just a second. Yocheved was Moses's mother and Miriam was his sister. Go ahead.
And according to another view, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, Yochebed and Elisheba, daughter of
Aminadab. Okay, so Yocheved was, and Elisheva was her Aaron's wife. They're saying Aaron's wife, and she was the daughter of Aminadab, who you will remember. I'll remind you in the Midrash. He was the guy that stood at the sea, and remember this Red Sea didn't part, and he went up to his ankles, and he went up to his knees, and he went up. That was Aminadab. So,
Susan, I think it was not shown.
oh, it's not shown. Oh, it's Aminadab was his father.
Aminadab.
That was his
And then,
father.
brother of Elisheva.
Sheva, right. I'm sorry. Aminadab was the father of Nachshon. That's right. Nachshon, son of Aminadab. But Elisheva was his sister then. So, and he was married to Aaron. So it could have been Yocheved and Elisheva. In both identifications, these are prominent Hebrew women who were celebrated for their righteousness. Elisheva. So that's a beautiful Hebrew name. And now you know who she was. She was Aaron's wife. You know, so that's interesting. Most people don't know. Okay, just finish this, Rebecca.
However, according to one unique tradition, Shifra and Puah were non-Jewish midwives who were said to be pious women and true converts.
Okay, so there's another idea that, you know, they converted or they followed the Hebrew religion, but the commentary seems to imply that they were, and were they Miriam? I mean, Miriam was very young. I don't know how she could have been a midwife. The rabbis love to give, you know, everybody, you know, our heroines all kinds of abilities, because my understanding that when Moses was born, she was a little girl, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. So I don't see it, though we know in the ancient world, a young girl could be an assistant. She could have accompanied her mother, you know, and been learning from the time she was very young, because the life expectancy was what, 30 total?
Oh, wow.
35 in
Wow.
those times. Okay. So now we're moving on to Yocheved, Miriam, and Pharaoh's daughter. So we understand the importance of Shifra and Puah. We're looking at the egg differently in our Seder plate because we're thinking about the two of them. And now we're going to this. So Susan Ehrlich, do you want to read? This is the text.
Sure. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman.
Okay, so this is that reflection of they remarried after the divorce because they already had kids. So that's why they came up with that idea.
The
Go
woman
ahead.
conceived and bore a son, And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months.
Okay, I want to stop you. So it wasn't fine. In Hebrew, it's yafeh or beautiful. It was a beautiful, these translations are so annoying. He was beautiful, a stunningly beautiful little boy. And because we love these mythic ideas that he's a hero, the Midrash says too, I got to look at you while I tell you these things because you're going to love it. First of all, that light filled the house. He was so beautiful, and that the whole house filled with light, and that he was born, the rabbis say, circumcised already.
I love it.
You know, because he's got to be what? And we see this idea of the holy child, you know, in many traditions, and baby Jesus, you know, is sort of in the same tradition of the baby who's going to grow up to be the prophet or the God. I'm sure there are similar stories about Muhammad that I don't know about Muhammad as a boy. And one more second. And we know even today in Tibetan Buddhism, they find a child who they say is the next incarnation of the Dalai Lama. And they recognize this in a young baby or a little child. So there is this tradition that holy children are born to redeem us, to lead us, to liberate us. Doris, you're muted. You're muted.
I unmute.
Okay.
Did the midwives circumcise those babies, or when?
I don't think so. I would think that the moil or whoever it is circumcised those babies if they were I guess they were circumcised because that was from the time of Abraham. There would have been this, or maybe the fathers did it. I don't think the midwives would do it. I think it would be some kind of a ceremony or ritual.
To wonder how that all came.
May I ask a question?
1 second. It started,
Okay.
we see it in the book of Genesis when God tells Abraham to do it, and Abraham does it, and he does it to Ishmael, and he does it to Ishmael, who the Muslims / Arabs consider their ancestor, that they come from Abraham through Ishmael, and Muslims also circumcise their sons.
They were already adults at that time, though, correct?
Not
They weren't
anymore.
babies. Oh, no.
They do it.
I thought they do their circumcision at like 13 though, or something.
Well, I
Yeah.
thought so
Well-
too, but no, because I actually had a Muslim endodontist, and I said, I have a question. Can I ask you a question?
Well, you were brave. I'm
I'm interested. I
I
said, I
pulled
know
all your teeth out.
now. I said, I know you circumcise your sons. He said, yes. I said, do you do it at puberty? Do you do it at 13? He says, no, we do it when they're little babies. We do it at birth.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, I'm sure they all went, forget it. Any modern Muslim is not going to wait till a kid's 13. It'd be horrendous. He says, no, we do it in the hospital actually, or something. So
Mhm.
I think that was a tradition, but no longer. So any other question about that?
No, about the
what did-
baby, about the
Stacy.
babies.
1 second, Stacy.
Yeah, I just have kind of a general question, and maybe you don't even want to address it now because maybe it's a little off topic, but I can't remember if it was you who said this or another rabbi, that commentary is interpretation. But
Translation is also commentary.
okay, but I guess what I'm wondering is sometimes it seems that some of the commentaries that you'll quote seem like kind of far out there, or I'm not sure on what
They're
basis. you come up with-
ridiculous. They're ridiculous.
That's what I was going to ask is how do they come? I mean, is there some sort of protocol that they come up with in terms of determining what's commentary, or is that not even appropriate to discuss?
No, it is. So first of all, some of these commentaries are like thousands of years old. I'm not giving you contemporary commentary. I'm giving you the Talmud or these, rabbis from like 1,000 or 1,500 years ago. And they believed in and then their Midrash was also that different rabbis sort of created beautiful stories to explain things. That what I've learned is sometimes they answered questions of the day, like they helped you in that time.
Mhm.
And then as time passed, though, like Orthodox Jews will believe Midrash is real. Liberal Jews see it as what it is. They're beautiful folk tales, explanations that have some interesting lessons to teach you, some moral lessons, some ethical lessons, or they're just fascinating stories from a point of view of one person or a few people. So we don't take them literally, but they're fun to read, like saying, oh, he was born circumcised. Come on. But what they're saying is they're trying to point out that Moses was a unique child. They want us to really revere Moses from the moment he's born. That light, that he was beautiful. All it says is he's beautiful. That's it in the text. But from there they go, well, light filled the room, and he was, like he almost had a halo. He was beautiful. He was circumcised. He was everything, because we're trying to emphasize how special he was, which don't forget, people didn't read. They're hearing stories. They're learning about Moses. How are we going to make Moses not just an old man with a beard who's really irritable a lot of the time as time goes on? So we tell these beautiful stories about his childhood and whatever for us to feel close to Moses. But we don't believe them. I mean, I don't. I guess others do. I don't believe them, but I like them. I like to. They delight me, and they kind of uplift me, and I think that's sometimes the part of Midrash that's kind of wonderful. And you can write new Midrash. I actually wrote a Midrash about the creation of Eve that I can share with you sometime, that I wrote. Yes, Penina.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had in my house for many years, my husband brought it from one of his model homes. The decorator put it there. There was a statue of Moses, that a replica of Michelangelo.
With the horns.
And and my kids always looked at me and they said, are we keeping this? And I used to say, well, it's a replica of Michelangelo. It comes to show you that the environment and the culture has always influence of people's choices when it comes to adopting ideals with the people that associated with it and stuff like that.
Well, we know that the horns, I think we talked about this.
Oh, I know why, because they thought it's the light, but they had
Because the word
translated
for
it
horns and rays of light.
light. So they
it's
took
the
the word
same
rays
word.
and they made it, yeah.
They mistranslated it.
Karen,
So they,
And I was asked, why are you keeping it there? I said, well, it's a replica of that statue. It's pretty. And I kept it. And it was there.
Okay, let's continue.
May
All
I
right.
ask my question?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Go
Okay,
ahead.
sorry, darling, no worries.
Go ahead.
You were talking about the children and all the children that were born in different cultures that have a light around them. I believe that there's some kind of miracle to do with their birth that has to do with that.
Could
I
be, but
believe,
the story gives them that special light for
Right.
us to, it
Yes.
marks it for us. When you hear that a child or a person is surrounded by light, it's a signal. This is a person who's going to help us, change us, redeem us, rescue us, something like that. Okay, so
thank you, Rabbi.
you're welcome. Okay, so now that was the text. Oh, no, we're still reading the text. So Susan, you were reading, I believe.
yes, but I have a thing, I thought the Hebrew word is Karen, which means both horns and light.
Yeah, Karen, Karnaim. Yes.
Penina, the Michelangelo statue was modeled on Pope Julius II. So, not that I mean, that was Michelangelo's, the one who contracted him to do the statue.
Right.
So that, then the other thing with light.
I know.
No, go ahead. She's making a comment about light. Go ahead.
Well, maybe those of you who have seen paintings, it's always surrounded by rays of light. So
Yeah.
it's a kind of universal thing. And maybe it prefigures Moses at a later age, when he is his face is surrounded by light.
Right. I'm sure this was written the Midrash was written way after the Torah. So you're absolutely right. They're saying he always had this special light, and that when he came down from Mount Sinai, it was too blazing, and that's when he had to wear a mask for the rest of his life.
So it's
Stacey, yeah, go ahead.
prefiguration. And the other thing too, I hear you with Midrash, but there's some that are not so outlandish or so
No, yeah.
And there's some that are really interesting that teaches a deeper story. And there's some that fills in the blanks. So for, in a colorful way. So what do you mean by beauty, and other things that are left hanging, Midrash often tries to fill in the blanks. And there's a difference, I think, between Midrash and commentary. And
Yes.
commentary is a more, instructive, perhaps less colorful than Midrash. Midrash is a kind of individualistic interpretation that gets written.
Right. What
Exactly,
I want to say that whatever it is that we do, it's influenced by the times.
Well,
The
that's
way-
it.
The way that the world was around you influenced also the artist, influenced the people who looked at the artist and what they did. It's all a matter of, and which brings me back to the idea that the women were saved because at the time, women were priestesses and they were given, some of them were given forces of today we will call it witches, and they were like a big part of the Egyptian rituals.
That's right.
So that's why we talk here about the women who were helping to give birth, and all the way of explaining why the girls were supposed to be also saved, because that's what they sacrificed to the gods,
Right, but
a
also,
virgin woman.
I
or
agree
things
with you,
like
but
that.
also you're right. There's a different commentary is kind of looking at it deeply and sometimes scholarly.
But are influenced by the era.
Yeah, but Midrash, now there was a man who married a woman and they had a baby. So the Midrash asks, well, wait a minute. We know he was already married because he had 2 other children. So the Midrash is they got divorced and now this is the first child of the remarriage. So you're right. They're filling in the blanks, but it is the Midrashic writer's explanation. Commentary is often more rabbinic and more looking at Talmud and looking at different sources in the Tanakh to kind of explain things. So they are different. So, but we only have like 4 minutes.
No,
So
I wish another hour of this.
all right, so let's just do this, finish the text at least. Okay, Susan.
Okay, where did we leave on? A man in the house of Levi, fine child. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water.
There's so many midrashim about this story. If anybody wants me to send them to you, I will. But one of them is that Moses was an extraordinary child and he didn't cry, and that the angel Gabriel came down and kind of pinched him or shook him so he would cry, in order that the Pharaoh's daughter would have compassion when she saw the crying baby, just saw a stoic baby. So that was one of the things they said. Another thing is that Yocheved named him Tuvia from the word tov, but it was Pharaoh's daughter who changed his name to Moses or Moshe, but his name was Tuvia from tov. Another midrash is that Pharaoh's daughter ultimately became a convert to Hebrew or Judaism, and her name is Batya, which means daughter of God. And the Midrash says God gave her this name because the way she said, "He will be my son" to Moses, and though he was not her son, God said, "You will be my daughter." Batya means daughter of God, because even though you're not literally, Jew, you will still be my daughter, and her name is Batya, daughter of God. So there's a lot more Midrash about Moses, and the special one, of course, is that, one second, Penina. When he was in the palace, he grabbed the king's crown to play with. We know this one, or if you don't, I'm sharing it with you. And this magician said, "This child is going to topple you and take your crown, and you should kill him." And so they put the baby to a test, and they put the crown and jewels on one side and burning coals on the other. And they said, if the child reaches for the crown, you should kill him. If he reaches for the coals, you can let him live. And of course, the child was going to reach for the jewels. And the angel Gabriel, who seems to be around in these midrashim, pushed his finger. He touched the coals. He burned his fingers, and he put it in his mouth and burned his tongue. And that's why, here's another midrash. Moses says, he had a speech defect. They said he was slow of speech, whatever that means, stuttering, lisping, thunking with a heavy, maybe he had a cleft palate. We don't know what he had. They explain it that way. But it's interesting that this person who was not articulate became this person who spoke to God face to face and represented the people. Yes.
Wow.
Who had their hand up? Penina.
I did.
Nina first.
I just want to point out, remember that we talked about that every time that the personality will change the face of history.
Yes.
They were born to a mother who actually couldn't have any children, to a barren mother. Now, his mother already has a brother and a sister, but Pharaoh's daughter was barren. She couldn't have any children. So here comes the personality following the tradition that they come from a mother that couldn't have, and then have this baby.
And then rising. Thank you. That's
changed
interesting.
the course of history.
That's so beautiful.
So I want to wish you all a happy Pesach and Shabbat
Yes.
Shalom and
Happy-
Chag Sameach.
Rabbi,
I'll
Rabbi,
see you- Yes,
are we meeting on the 12th of April?
yes.
Okay, because it's during.
Oh, actually, no, is it Yontif? Is it actually?
It's
on
a
a
7th day,
Sunday,
it's a
Mother.
7th day of Passover.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't think so, because I think I have Yisker that day, actually.
Okay, that's why I just want to make
All right,
sure.
all right, we'll send out an email and let you know, because I haven't looked at the calendar, to be honest.
Love you all.
Right,
so
everybody,
much.
so
Great
teacher.
reading.
Tonight,
Have
thank
fun
you.
tonight.
Bye.
Have fun tonight.
And we'll
Chag
see you for
Sameach.
tonight's Seder.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Ladies, bye.